Hello, my lovelies. Trey here from Iron Sharpens Iron Council. So today I'm going to just go over sovereignty. People being sovereign, or are they not? Who's the sovereigns, right? So I was actually scrolling in some posts on Facebook and this came across. I'm not sure, I didn't mark who exactly posted this, but I liked it. So I figured I would share it with you because it's an open door to discuss what it's all about when it comes to sovereignty and the exercise of powers and duties and such. So fun things we have in store for you here today. I'll just dig right into it. So he talks about the law of persons is the law of status or condition. I'm not sure where that comes from. I don't know that I agree with that, but we'll roll with it. People are not persons. Persons are defined as non-sovereigns. A sovereign is someone who is not subject to statutes. A person is someone who voluntarily submits himself to statutes. In the United States, the people are sovereign over their civil servants. Romans 6:16, don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone to obey him as slaves, you are slaves to the one whom you obey? So then they cite Spooner versus McConnell. So I want to talk about that a minute. So the correct statement, yeah, people are not persons. Persons are a fictitious creation or a persona or personage, by which, as I've explained before, we have many personas or personalities. When we occupy or have the occupation in life, there are several hats we wear when conducting our life business. So we will take care of our children, and that is our parent person. We will conduct our finances, that is our debtor person, our borrower person, so forth and so on. So when you have the people who are sovereign, as some of you may already understand, or you will hear if you haven't heard already, that the government and the courts have removed themselves from their sovereignty, from their sovereign statuses, when they sign contracts, when they engage in commerce. The same applies to people. So although people are the sovereign over the government and the power is in the people to delegate their authorities to government, once the people engage in commerce and sign these contracts, they therefore forfeit a piece of their sovereignty with everything they engage in through commercial activity. So power of the people is a very important thing that most people don't really come to terms with. They just don't, it doesn't click with them. It is the people who can decide or determine what should or should not be law. And in old world, before technology, in order for something like that to happen, the people would actually have to show up and vote on any particular law that was written. So if Congress wanted to impose a new piece of legislation, they would have to first have the people agree to that sort of legislation being passed. And in order to do something like that, the people would have to know that the Congress intended on passing such a legislation. So they would have to give notice to the people in an inconspicuous place so that people would be able to determine whether or not they wanted that particular law to pass, and they would have a say through voting, right? So pick your representative. So you're basically waiving your right to directly go into Congress and directly vote on a particular legislation. Instead, what you have done is you have taken that power and you have conveyed it over to the representatives of your states. So now they, acting as you, will go into Congress and make those decisions for you. This is you conveying or forfeiting your right to directly take to partake in the process of legislation, which is why we have a legislative branch. So when you've decided to go ahead and give all your power to the legislative branch in regards to writing laws, through your representative will be considered your vote as to whether or not or which laws will pass, okay? So this is your legislative power that has been conveyed over to the legislative branch of government, and you have entrusted them to write laws on behalf of the people, representative of what the people want. This is the authority vested in them by the people. Okay, so if they do something outside of that scope, then that would mean that they are acting against the people, okay, outside the scope of their authority, and therefore they would be abusing their power to legislate against the people's will and or consent. What makes that so important is that we understand, and by our constitutions, that they have to have the consent of the governed before they can take action. When is the last time anyone asked you if you consented? So what does it mean to consent? It's not real specific. So we can presume that the consent of the governed isn't necessarily by written expressed consent, but it could be by implied consent. So through your actions in public, you imply when you have granted authority to someone to exercise one of the powers that are vested in you as being one of the people. Okay, so if you look at your constitutions, it clearly states that the power is in the people. It clearly states that there are certain powers and authorities in people, but certain rights protected over persons. And that's kind of an important differentiation, because you need to understand when we're speaking of people, we're talking about the living, breathing bodies that run around every day using their thoughts to take action. You know, you're all in perpetual motion. A person who has rights protected under the 14th Amendment are the characters, the actors that you play in all the different aspects of your life. Sometimes you play the parent, sometimes you play the debtor, sometimes you play the borrower, sometimes you play the driver. And when you're in that capacity, you have certain duties and obligations that you must stay within the confines of, so you can protect the public from harm. So this is the difference between people and persons, okay? So persons is the people kind of split into their 12 different personas, 12 different personalities. And when they're in that capacity or actors in that role, then they are regulated basically by government to act in that role a specific sort of way so that they do not interfere with the ordinary course of business of other people. This is what it means for them to maintain the order of things. So if people are acting in a professional public scope, say as a driver, and don't want to follow the rules, then the government must step in order to maintain order so that other people don't think they can get away with the same thing. Not real complicated, but never really explained. So I wanted to go through that a little bit with you. The sovereignty of a state does not reside in the persons who fill the different departments of its government, but in the people from whom the government emanated, and they may change it at their discretion. Sovereignty then in this country abides with the constituency and not with the agent. And this remark is true both in reference to the federal and state government. So sovereignty of a state not residing in persons. This is this powerful statement based on everything I had just said, because each person, like I said, is the 14th Amendment protected citizen person, parent person. So when you're operating in those capacities in the public, yes, you have certain obligations and duties, but you also have certain protections, immunities as well. So this is something that I think we drop the ball on quite frequently when we're thinking about the way this works, because persons do have protections when they're in that official capacity under whichever occupation that they're working with at that moment. So if that is clear enough, I think that we understand that people have a certain contractual social compact by which they abide by. Okay, and this is where we have citizens. So what is the social compact? It's, in my opinion, see, a lot of people will say it's the Constitution. Sure, I guess it could be that too. But at this point in the game, in present day and age, I would say it's the Social Security. And the reason for that is because if you think about the words, to secure the social health and well-being of a nation. Okay, that's Social Security. So we all have agreed to participate in Social Security. We invest in Social Security. We participate in Social Security, and we receive from Social Security. That is implications of a contract. It is implications of an established relationship amongst the people who all participate therein. So if we know that every American is signed up into the Social Security Administration, are we all not now participants together as a whole, as a group, membership, each of us being a member in participating in that social compact? The Social Security Administration also has Title IV funding and Title IV regulations and all kinds of goodies behind that I won't get into, but it tells you that through the Social Security, through your promise basically to protect the social welfare of everyone, not just yourself, and through accepting a benefit, you have also therefore executed a contract. It does not take written consent to execute a contract. We can execute contracts based on our actions alone. So if you have received a benefit of the Social Security system, that would be an execution that implies by your action you would like to participate. And if you would like to participate and therefore received a benefit, it also then means that you have now bound yourself to the obligations inside of that particular agreement as well. So we don't need it to be in writing for us to have executed its intended purpose. And when we get our first job, for example, if we are turning 18 years old, right, the first thing you do, you want to go get your little job. So you use that Social Security number to enter into the labor force. That labor force has protections over laborers so that you don't get abused in the workforce. This is only possible when a corporation that you work for is incorporated into the Social Security and United States and IRS and all those different administrations, okay? So when the Social Security number is given to your employer, the employer's next move is to report back to the Social Security Administration and to the Labor Department that they have a new employee, and that employee will be taking funds from their paycheck, from their labor, and investing it into Social Security. This investment into that Social Security fund makes you a member participant of the Social Security compact. So when we all invest into one social protective system, we are now all bound by and obligated to protect all of our members equally from social discrimination, social disparagement, and all kinds of other things, right? So this is when you lose sovereignty. Because if we were in a republic form of government where the people were sovereign, then we have, like I said, given up portions of the sovereignty when we give a portion of our power over to a legislator or to a representative to write laws and determine how they want laws to be, okay? So you're not really sovereign if you're registered to vote, and therefore, by implication, have agreed to forfeit your power of legislation over to the representative. But in addition to that, now you've taken your sovereignty and you've entered into a social compact whereby the purpose of that is to protect the public trust. So all those investments have to be appropriated to the proper agencies to do the right thing in all sorts of different circumstances. So mostly we think about it for retirement purposes. So when we invest our money today into the Social Security account, that is not banked. It is not saved. That money that you put in today is utilized immediately to support the elderly who are retiring today. So if you do not put in your portion, there may be an elderly person out there who may get shortchanged on the amount they would otherwise have received in Social Security funds. Okay, so this is an execution of a social compact. In addition to that, the Social Security Title IV explains all the other different obligations and duties that you have to maintain and sustain the economic, social health of your community, because you've agreed to take part in securing the social health of all of the people, the members in that particular secured agreement. So now that we've done that, it would be quite difficult to say that we have sovereignty still. We've waived that sovereignty in exchange for social benefits and privileges. We've waived that sovereignty in order to partake in or participate in the needs of other people in our nation who may be impoverished or in danger of some sort of exploitation. And that's what that's about. So to say that we are sovereign still as of today doesn't really make sense, because it would appear to me that we have forfeited the sovereignty upon receipt of benefit from Social Security. And it's so tricky, so very tricky, because an employer will not allow you to get a job and enter the labor force without that Social Security number. It was not always that way. Another topic for another day, but technically speaking, they should be allowing you to obtain employment and being able to refuse the use of the Social Security number. But that's a challenge all by itself. But if that were the case, it would be a way of avoiding this social compact designed to basically serve the poor and the needy, which is ultimately what communists do. That's always been the communist advertisement plots and marketing. It's always about help the poor, help the children, help the most vulnerable of society, and equality, and everybody be equal. So sovereignty, I would say, when we didn't refrain from entering into that Social Security system, we lost pretty much most of whatever sovereignty we would have left after delegating some of our powers over to the several different departments and to the branches of government. But, there's good news, because no one ever told you, no one ever disclosed or noticed the public about the implications and consequences of entering into a Social Security agreement. So again, another time, another show. Where did I leave off here? Sovereignty then is the country, sovereignty then in this country abides with the constituency and not with the agent. And this remark is true, both in reference to the federal and state government. So in essence, we should be able to fire the agents. So if we have granted our authority over to a representative and he is not representing what the people actually want, we should be able to get him impeached, get him out of there, repeal his position. In a perfect world, that's how it should work if we really had authority over the government. And it wouldn't be such a big, complicated process. If enough people came together and said that we want so-and-so removed from that seat, it should just be done. But give that a shot. Let's see if that works out for you. Tells you who's in charge, really. And so 1794 U.S. Supreme Court case, Glass versus Sloop Betsy. Our government is founded upon compact. Sovereignty was and is in the people. 1829 U.S. Supreme Court case, Lansing versus Smith. People of a state are entitled to all rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. And all of these things ring true, again, if you refrain from acting in commerce and from signing away your power and your rights over to agencies and agents. By the point of your 20-some-odd birthday, it is likely you have signed away most of your power and most of your rights somewhere along the lines. Well, read your mortgage, that's the worst one. So if you haven't signed away all your rights, if you haven't forfeited all your powers, once you got your first mortgage, that pretty much sealed the deal. And that contract, another conversation for another day, because that one is an ugly one. But people of the state are entitled to all rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. So think of everyone compiled together as a whole represent the king of a nation, the ultimate ruler. And even for a king, it is difficult for him to perform all his duties by himself. He needs many others to assist him with that, right? We need someone to help us just the same, which is why we have those three branches of government, which is why we delegate our authority and our power to agents, to all these different peoples, all these different departments in order to conduct certain business on our behalf, because we don't know how to do it and we don't have time to do it, right? So this is another way that we forfeit our sovereignty every time we do these things. The United States as a whole emanates from the people in their capacity as sovereigns made and adopted the Constitution. That's up for debate, because sure, I wasn't there. I would feel that if a Constitution were to remain in place, that it should be represented every generation. Talking about constitutions from the 1700s, well, I wasn't there. How can I know that the people created it? I mean, technically speaking, it was some forefathers, a bunch of guys who, came together, decided it was a great idea. Was every person, every single one of us that were there, were there thousands of us? And of those thousands, did they all agree with the forefathers to do such a thing? I don't know. But what I do know is that things change. So from then until now, would the population as a whole, as a majority, still want a constitution? And if so, why don't we take an oath to it? I mean, the police officers take an oath to it, judges take an oath to it. The only people who don't take an oath to it is us. We never take an oath to that thing. So why is it so important for them to have that oath, but not us? That's another question. Just things to think about. You know, if I wanted to take an oath to my Constitution, wouldn't I want to take an oath to my state constitution, being that I was born in my state and not born in the United States? And if that were the case, would I be able to go to, say, the Secretary of State or somebody to say, yo, you know what, I love our Illinois Constitution, and if you don't mind, I would like to take an oath to it and have that oath sworn upon in front of you, so that I can assure or secure my place and my participation in that Constitution. Makes sense to me, but for whatever reason, that does not occur. And if you try and ask them to sign an oath to the state constitution, I am certain they will say no. So, U.S. Supreme Court in Luther versus Borden, 48 U.S. 112, led 581. Governments are but trustees acting under derived authority and have no power to delegate what is not delegated to them. But the people, as the original fountain, might take away what they have delegated and entrust to whom they please. The sovereignty in every state resides in the people of the state. And that's well written, well stated, well versed. Yeah. People being able to entrust whom they please. So this is, our rights to association, or our rights not to associate with whomever. So if I don't trust you, if I hire you as my agent to, say, I don't know, manage my finances, and something occurs that just makes me feel weary, that I just no longer trust you, there should be no problem with me saying, okay, well, I just don't feel it anymore. You know what? I don't want to associate with you anymore. Here's your last paycheck. Have a nice day, right? But again, we are in a position that we cannot just remove these people, even though every person you ask on the street, if you ask every single person you've ever known, do you trust your representative? Do you trust your congressman? Do you trust these people? Every one of them, 100% of the time, will say no. So it should be easy to remove one of these people from office, but it is not. And there's lots of reasons for that. All right, so the sovereignty in every state resides with the people of the state, and they may alter and change their form of government at their own pleasure, says this guy, right? Says this case, says this judge, whatever. I would like to see that occur because, again, if you look at our government and our officers, they are usually some sort of moguls, billionaires, lawyers, attorneys. They do not have anything in common with us. They do not understand our lifestyles. They do not understand our culture. And they probably have a superiority complex that leads to them thinking that they are better than us and therefore don't care how they treat us because we're not up to par with them. That would be my guess. Not a good idea to have those people in office. So U.S. Supreme Court in Yickwo versus Hopkins. While sovereign powers are delegated to the government, sovereignty itself remains with the people. Yickwo is a powerful anti-discrimination case. You might get the impression that the legislature can write perfectly legal laws, yet the laws cannot be enforced contrary to the intent of the people. And this is true, except, like I said, that the intent of the people can be implied. It doesn't have to be with written consent. So the way people behave on a regular basis when we bow down to someone or submit to someone as a whole on a regular basis, it also then means that by implication, we have authorized them to take power over us. So this is where it gets kind of sticky. The consent of the governed doesn't really come from us, the people, because what they do, as I've told you before, is they conduct human subject research from community-based participatory research projects, and they determine if there is a divide amongst the people in their cultural beliefs. If I believe spanking a child is abuse and you do not, this means there's a controversy. So If there's a controversy amongst the people, then the representatives will look to experts to decide which side of the coin is right. So if it's a 50-50 split, the next step would be to go to psychologists and find all of these journals to determine if it is proper to impose legislation banning the spanking of children and punishing it as being abuse. And if the expert says yes, based on their research, our representatives will likely roll with that, and then we will have legislation enacted that tells us we can no longer spank our children. It's just that simple. It's and again, it's not because they asked us how we felt about it. They make that determination based on studies conducted inside of each community. And then on top of that, what they do is what is called a demonstration project. So if I go to court today where legislation hasn't been enacted in positive law about spankings, and I get into the courtroom shows that, well, statute says spanking is abuse, but there's no real consequence in the statute, meaning that there's no punishment he can apply to me for spanking. What happens next is I will accept the fact that it is illegal or wrong or immoral. And when I accept that, I do so by signing documentation admitting to committing an abuse act. This is my vote. This is me saying that I agree that our community thinks that spanking is abuse, and therefore legislation should be passed. My legislature sees that, my representative sees that, and they say, okay, there you go. A bunch of people went to court and all agreed while they were in the court voluntarily. And so now we have legislation based on the common belief and custom practices of the people decided by court pressure, threat, duress, all kinds of goodies. So that's how that works. It's as if servants do not make rules for their masters. It's as if the citizens who created government were their masters. It's as if civil servants were to obey the higher authority. You are the higher authority of Romans 13:1. You as ruler are not a terror to good works for Romans 13:3. Imagine that. Isn't it a shame that your government was surrendered to those who are a terror to good works? These aren't my opinions, by the way. Like I said, I got this from someone who posted it, and I forgot to take note of the name of the person, so I probably should have removed the opinions before I shared it with you, but I thought it was interesting. U.S. Supreme Court in Juilliard versus Greeman, there is no such thing as power of inherent sovereignty in the government of the United States in this country. Sovereignty resides in the people. And Congress can exercise no power which they have not by their Constitution entrusted to it. All else is withheld. So the constitutions provide for you limits on what government can or cannot do. And that's what they're talking about here. So when they exercise their power to overreach into an aspect of our lives, we need to check it. If we don't check it, if we don't stop it, then by acquiescence, we agree to it. So if they keep overreaching that power, if they keep abusing that power and they keep, acting outside the scope of their authority, and the people do nothing, the people do not stand up to help each other to stop it, then by that action or by that inaction, the people have agreed to allow for them to act outside the scope of their authority, and therefore they are not liable while acting outside that scope. So if people remain silent and they open up, the TV screen to watch football, and they want to point the finger at the neighbor about how much they dislike all the different social behaviors of their neighbor, as long as they keep doing that, then the overreach of government and the abuse of power will continue because they're allowing for it as the sovereign. And by divine providence, as long as they allow for it, it will continue. That's all there is to it. The government actors will consider that to be permission to continue on with this nonsense. All else is withheld. All right, so U.S. Supreme Court in Wilson versus Omaha Indian Tribe, in common usage, the term person does not include the sovereign, and statutes employing the word are ordinarily construed to exclude it. U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. v. Cooper, since in common usage the term person does not include the sovereign, statutes employing that term are ordinarily construed to include it. To exclude it. So they're speaking of persons, not of people, when we're reading a statute, if they haven't said specifically the sovereign is included in the scope of the statute. And what makes us a person inside of the scope of the statute is when we sign up or agree to perform a certain sort of fiduciary duty. So by establishing a relationship with another entity or another human, another person, once that establishment has occurred, we can now say that a relationship exists. And because that relationship exists, it is reasonable to believe that inside of that relationship, there are expectations, obligations, duties, and benefits for all of the parties involved. If you did not write out the conditions and terms of that relationship, then the government has taken it upon themselves to create that contract for you as a class under that specific type of person. So if we're dealing with parent persons, the statute will tell you exactly what your fiduciary duty is as a parent when acting in that role, that and in that capacity with your child. So what do we say about that? Do we say that when you have children, a relationship does not exist? Can we say that when we have children, there is not a benefit received from having them? Can we not say that there are obligations and duties that we owe to our children and them to us? This is the establishment of a relationship. The moment you gave birth to the child, breastfed the child, gave the child gave the child a bottle, you have executed a filial relationship with the child. So now there are certain expectations, duties, obligations, and benefits that will be exchanged between the two of you for at least 18 years. And because after birthing this amazing little bundle of joy, you did not set forth your ways that you would handle this relationship. You did not set forth on paper your terms, conditions, expectations, and benefits that you intended to exchange with this child throughout its growth. Because you didn't do it, your representative government did it for you. So that's why when we go to court, the first thing they do is they establish parentage. That is to give you a decree evidencing the fact that a relationship between the parent and child, the mother, father, child, existed, and that the mother, father understood that they have duties and obligations to the child, and that the mother and father understand the very basic common principles in rearing a child, absence of abuse and neglect. So the court presumes that as a commoner and being educated about the very basic common structure of a parent-child relationship, they would also therefore understand what they should or should not do. That's the presumption of law, because it is a common belief amongst the commoners in the community that everything written inside that statute is customarily and uniformly how everyone in that neighborhood behaves towards their children. So when you are not within the scope of that, when you acted outside the scope of your authority, then the person is now in breach of fiduciary duty of care. So we can punish you in that person's capacity or correct your behavior under that person's capacity. But it doesn't mean that we can punish the body, the whole person, the whole soul, the whole people, okay? Because even though you have failed in this particular fiduciary duty of care, you may excel in other ways. You might be great at paying your bills. You might be great at labor. So because you are still a productive member of society in other ways and still have value to society because you can contribute to society in other ways, you just can't be a parent, we will only punish the or correct the parent person. The rest of you is free to go. The rest of your persons can continue on and carry on business as usual because everything else is in order. And this is the person we're looking at in this general provisional court, where we will try to give you services to correct your parents' path behavior. But if you don't take that service, we will default you. We're offering you a service to help you improve upon your performance under your fiduciary parenting agreement. And if you don't want those services, then we can easily presume that your denial of said services is because you don't intend on meeting the criteria inside the statute. And without having that intent, well, then we don't have to perform for you. We don't have to provide you fair and meaningful adjudicatory services anymore. Because in your breach, it left us to the point where we're no longer obligated. We can wash our hands of it. We don't have to give you anything because you didn't stay within the confines of the contract. And that is why they regulated parents and persons and split them up in all these different categories and departments. But again, this particular writing is not my works, it's that of someone else. But I wanted to share it because I thought it was a great way to dive in, dig into all of these different confusing sort of mumbo jumbo layers of the onion. And I hope this brings clarity so that you learn government and so that we can level the playing field in our understanding on how they operate and start using our critical thinking and deductive reasoning skills to determine what actions we want to take in the future. Can't erase the past. What happens, happens. But as of right now, we can increase our ability to identify when one of these people are acting outside the scope of their authority. We can use that ability to identify when something isn't right. And we could do it quick and not have to wait until we're involved in some sort of mess, 8 months, a year in. So I encourage everyone to keep learning about government, and I'll continue putting up videos to help you to learn that. So keep tuning in. Make sure that you hit the like. Make sure that you put some comments in, because when you do that, it will increase the visibility of these videos and hopefully gain more subscribers. And when we do that, it is very encouraging for us because it shows us that you are engaged. It shows us that you want more videos. When it's lacking in that capacity, then we may determine that the videos are not really something you want to interact with. And, that's okay. It could happen. I know this could be boring sometimes, but likely when it comes to the educational side, I'll probably move it into a more private venue as opposed to putting them up on YouTube. If it's not, interesting to the viewer, there's no point in me putting all this time into it. But remember, hit the like button, hit the bell, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. This is just scratching the surface on all the things that I'm about to show you that you don't understand about government and how it works. This is the very basics right here. The reason I'm showing you these very basics first is because you're going to need to have a clear understanding of this when I release some really interesting information to you in the future. So stay tuned, hit the like, hit the subscribe. If you're not a member of Iron Sharpen Iron PMA, go ahead and sign up, become a member, because at this point in time, like I said, this is just scratching the surface. I have much, much more to show you, and some of it might be quite shocking to you. But I will talk to you all again in the next show. And if you have any questions, remember, use that comment box. Let me know. Have a great day.